I can soar so free and high, with fiery breath and scales of gold, legends told, stories untold.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for coming out this evening. I know it was the air conditioning that was the big draw. I know this because my house could also use an upgrade in its air conditioning. Thank you to Lasting Joy, to their staff tonight for having us. Please tip your staff members. So why are we here, aside from the air conditioning, of course? Why is secret language of towns, villages, and cities? There is a rumor, of course, that this is simply a really snazzy way to dress up a civics lesson, that you've all been tricked into coming for a rehash of what you might have heard in high school. I only know about that rumor because I started it myself. There's another rumor that this presentation is designed to sell some of our wonderful merchandise from historic Red Hook down here, which includes a t-shirt that is drawn from a map that you'll see tonight. But really, the nexus, the creation point behind this presentation was 12 years. I've been Dutchess County historian for 12 years, and I continually hear this question, where do I actually live? Now, before I got into government, that seemed like a weird question to ask. Now that I am in government, as you'll see tonight, it's not so weird, but people are like, for example, Lasting Joy Brewery is in Tivoli, right? Is it? I hear some yeses, I hear some no's. Don't worry, there is an answer at the end of the presentation for this. Know where I live. Am I in Upper Red Hook? Am I in Milan? Is Rock City part of Red Hook? It's all sorts of questions like that, but county-wide. So you all are a test audience tonight. If you like this program, I might seek to replicate it on other town levels. If you don't like this program, I'll probably still seek to replicate it on other town levels because it checks a box. But let's get down to some real answers for why we have this secret language. First of all, do you need more volume? This has been the first time in my life when I haven't been heard at a distance. All right, does that help? I'm sorry for the people sitting up front.
Oh, we can hear it.
I'm definitely gonna have to stay away from those speakers. Anyway. So Dutchess County is kind of ridiculously old as far as America goes. Is anyone here from New England? Show of hands. All right, I know you guys are even older. You don't have to be like, 1683, that's adorable that you think that's old. But for most people today, especially folks from like west of New York, that's pretty darn old. And it means that all of these communities have a long, past, and many of the answers to why things are the way they are today, in terms of government, in terms of community boundaries, in terms of why do all the roads go to the places that I don't want to go, instead of directly to the places I do want to go. That's found in this deep past, and because things develop strangely instead of rationally over time, that means that you get a certain level of vocabulary that's specific to the trade. So that's one answer. The second answer, leading into that, is that nothing is simple in the Empire State when it comes to either governance or taxation. That's kind of part of the brand, the trademark, it's something that's how you get to be an Empire State. So a lot of what we're going to look at tonight that drives the development of, in this case, towns and villages, are these concerns over the people who live in an area have say over the things that happen to them, and how are you going to pay for public works projects? Like, anyone here from the village of Red Hook? No? Shocking. Well, if you run into someone from the village of Red Hook, ask them how the sewer project's going. It's a big part of the answer here. And perhaps the biggest answer to this question is because the United States Postal Service does not care about anything that came before the United States Postal Service. That's why you can pay taxes in Red Hook and have a zip code from Milan, or actually more dauntingly, the reverse. Pay taxes in Milan and have a zip code in Red Hook. So moving on along here, we're going to give you a timeline. There's going to be some text here. It's probably going to be our most text-heavy slide. But in history, we do have to have some names and some dates to create a skeleton around which to hang the story. So the first date, the most important date when we think about towns, villages, and even cities here in Dutchess County, is November 1st, 1683. Yes, New England. I know that Harvard had a library by then, maybe even a dorm. The stockade had been expanded. Thank goodness. No one's here from Virginia, right? Yes? No? Oh, okay, good, because they were really ahead of the game by that time. But November 1st, 1683 is when the original 12 counties of New York were established. And everything in New York, governmentally, territorially, springs from that point. It all goes back. Because yes, there's only 12 counties. Albany was about as far west as those counties got. But the western boundary of Albany County was not really well defined. They kind of said, here are the eastern boundaries, which included Dutchess County at that point in time. And then the west just keeps going as far as the land goes, because they didn't know, was there a Northwest Passage? Was there a dramatic mountain range? Do we want tax revenue from people in Northern Asia? These are all seemingly good ideas in the 1680s. But Dutchess is, we have boundaries on all four sides in 1683, including actually where we are standing today was originally part of Dutchess, because the Roloff-Jansen Kill was the county's northern border. And somewhere in here we have the town of Germantown historian Thomas Shannon, who I'm convinced came to make sure that I wasn't going to announce a campaign to re-annex the town of Claremont into Dutchess County. I mean, if you guys want to come on over, we can make that dream a reality, but that's really up to you. So 1683, Dutchess County set up along with the rest. The reason for this is really about taxation, because people are coming in from Connecticut, they're coming in from Massachusetts. Both of those colonies would love to have western borders on the Hudson River. It's a really great natural border. But the colony of New York would lose a lot of real estate in that transaction. So that's where we begin. The next big moment is the creation of Rhinebeck Precinct. So when Dutchess County is created in 1683, there are no internal divisions. It is literally lines drawn on a map because you are staking out a claim to territory. Beginning in 1714, you have these slow but steady division of the county into smaller and smaller units as more people come in. Because in 1714, when the first census of Dutchess is taken, and remember, this is Dutchess that includes the modern town of Claremont, and includes all of Putnam County. There are 447 people documented as living in that territory. They were too far spread out to all get together for a photo op, because I know that would have been an awesome opportunity, but 447, which is why when Dutchess first got its own government in 1714, they said, well, I don't think we really need to worry about how many people we're going to elect to office. 3 will do the job. It's a steady process up until this point in 1737 when a bunch of precincts are formed. So these precincts are the basis of our modern towns today. During the technically right after the Revolutionary War in 1787 and 1788, these precincts were first confirmed under New York state law that these are municipalities. That was in 1787. And in 1788, they said, precincts, what does that even mean? Sounds suspiciously English. We're going to call them all towns now. Which is why basically 2/3 of the towns in Dutchess County have the same birthday, because that was a general law in March of 1788. March is very complicated months for municipal birthdays. So again, 1737, Rhinebeck Precinct is formed, and it includes Red Hook. All the way up, except not to the Roloff-Jansen's Kill, sadly. Our next point in time is a little bit contested, as one of our attendees tonight likes to bring to my attention. And that's the formation of the town of Red Hook as something separate from. Yes, thank you for the shout out back there. I like it too. There is a slight problem though. As you'll see, the law separating Red Hook from Rhinebeck is passed in June of 1812. And that's the date that you'll find on the town logo and seals and all sorts of things, but the fine print for those of you close enough to read it. And this is somewhat unusual. in municipal establishment incorporation legislation says, yes, the town of Red Hook, and here are the boundaries, shall be a separate thing from Rhinebeck. But they're going to figure out how all of this works in April of 1813. Normally, it's like 3 weeks later, you guys better have figured out how poor relief and all the rest and your elections are going to work. Not the case here. So incorporation there. Then we skip all the way to 1872. So basically 60 years until we get our next thing. When you see big gaps in timelines, that's like foreshadowing that there's a story there, or at least it's a historian trying to foreshadow to you that they're going to tell you about a story there. So Tivoli incorporates in 1872. They had a heck of a party back in 2022 celebrating that. Then the village of Red Hook decided, maybe, perhaps we should do this thing too. So they incorporate very slowly in 1894, and hence the rivalry between the two villages is established with, how many Tivolians are here tonight? Just out of curiosity. All right, so 2 from Tivoli, none from the village of Red Hook. We're going to see that the village of Tivoli has actually been leading the way since 1872 in this slight contest. So that's our broad overview, 1683 to 1894. Where do we really start this conversation? I prefer to start it with our first known, at least known to me, map that shows Red Hook, that is a manuscript map actually drawn by the people who live here. So the image you've got up here, and I apologize for the folks in the front. Clearly the county needs to buy me a bigger screen and a more powerful projector. Be sure to write your legislators and let them know that. You've got a squiggle down at the bottom here that says Red Hook. And at the top of this, it talks about this is a report of the Commissioner of Roads. So the roads commissioners were the predecessors to our modern Department of Transportation or Public Works. They were the ones responsible for laying out roads, for making sure that the farmers didn't build fences across the roads after they'd been laid out, which happens quite frequently, for negotiating the routes of roads, and for closing down old roads. And in this case, they were talking about, those Livingstons, they've built a new grist mill because everyone needs to get their grain ground, and now we have to lay out a new road that goes directly to the new mill and close the road that used to go to the old mill, which is no longer in operation. Things have not actually changed that much in municipal government. This is still a big thing today. But they threw us, and you can see that in the Dutchess County Ancient Documents portal, which, if I push the right button, yes, is at dutchessny.gov/ancient documents. Happy to give you this document number. You can bring it up for yourself. This is one of our ongoing projects with the county clerk's office to make Dutchess County's court records between 1721 and 1889 available for you, because they were all manuscript. But down in the teeny-weeny corner of this map, there's a little dot that says Mill of Hoffmans. So the only thing that's allowed to be processed there are Hoffmans. And thank you for the one person who likes that kind of humor. And then they wrote Red Hook. Now, north, south, east, and west not really called out here because they're more concerned about where the roads are going. But that Red Hook is where Tivoli is today. So when we begin thinking about Red Hook as a community before we get to it as a town or as a couple of villages, it starts on the Hudson River shore. What is that's our mark there, our next stop. All right, so that was 1770s, Revolutionary era. Dutchess County does get a little bit of a slower start than some of its neighbors. But after the Revolution, things really kick off and go gangbusters, because we have something that the West Bank does not have. We have the Post Road that runs from Albany to New York City. It's called the Post Road, not because people post about it on social media, but because that's the mail route. Now, ideally, you would send anything that needed to go between Albany and New York City by boat, because that is the fastest way to travel in the 18th century for much of the 19th century. However, back when we had real winters in the 18th century, the river would freeze hard, and there weren't handy-dandy Coast Guard cutters like the Sturgeon Bay to break the ice for boat traffic. So that meant that you had to have a road between these two metropoli in order to make sure that communications went back and forth. Now, this road goes back potentially thousands of years. It was clearly an indigenous people's path. But after the revolution, the state of New York established an important new precedent. They had a public works job to do, so they incorporated a private corporation to do this work for them. They created a Stagecoach Corporation in 1785, and that coach system was designed to move mail with a 2-day service. So that means if you mailed a letter in Albany on day 1, it would arrive in New York City on day 3. That's a lot of ground to cover with a stagecoach, because it's not just the 1870s Old West that has stagecoaches. It's a lot of ground to cover with a coach and horses. Most of the time, they stop halfway down around Fishkill, but this is going gangbusters back and forth. It doesn't take them long to get to the point, as they're saying in this newspaper article in 1787, of we're going to start offering passenger service because some people don't want to go by boat or can't go by boat. What is the point for the secret language of towns, villages, and cities about stagecoaches? This is a major economic push factor, because once you get money flowing into an area, you get people flowing into an area, businesses, and it creates a cycle of growth. That is what the Post Road does for Red Hook. Once this first stage route is set up, these coaches, yes, they stop overnight in one place down in the southern part of modern Dutchess County, but those horses need to drink, they need to be fed, they need to be occasionally changed along the way, so every 8 or 10 miles, they're going to find a tavern or build a tavern, and that's going to become not only a watering hole for the locals, but a place where the coach can stop, repair, do whatever it needs to do. So that begins bringing in more attention here in Northern Dutchess, because these little taverns, which are more or less one-room affairs, now have a source of income that allows them to expand into much larger affairs. And that's when we get the first Traveler's Guide to the Hudson Valley. It's 1789 by Christopher Coles. You can't look at this as a modern person because it does not make sense as a modern person. So you have a single page here in front of you, but you actually have 3 sections of road right next to each other. The only way you can tell that is he's putting the mile markers down. Because what do they want to do? Save on paper. So the idea is you're going to have this so that folks who are traveling on the stage know where the places are to stop, to hang out, to see people. They can tell where their relative position is. Without the stage, it doesn't make much sense, because in the 18th and through most of the 19th century, if you don't have money, you don't travel. Most of these people, which is why we have hamlets, were born, grew up, lived, and died within about a 10 square mile area, because there was just no other reason to go anyplace else, which is why wars were super exciting during early American history. It was an all-expenses ticket to someplace you didn't know you wanted to go, but went anyway. Now, when we look at this, we do see that Red Hook is called out, and it is nowhere near the Hudson River. This is now inland. We know that partially because of the names on the buildings. So Hiermans, Thomas, Van Ness, Schermerhorn. This Red Hook is what we today call Upper Red Hook. So between 1770 and 1789, Red Hook has now shifted. And this is why I say that you've got to take this deep history into context, because we're not always talking about the same place by the same name at the same time in the past. In Dutchess County, it's not a matter of just where you are. It's very frequently a matter of when you are. So we have this lovely map. Thank you, Christopher Coles. That's Upper Red Hook there. And then we have those 2 ads. So the first is by Thomas Swart. It's August 1788. And he is talking about how he has just opened a tavern, probably to help cater to that post-road audience, but also to locals as well. He gives us a location. It's in Red Hook, half a mile south of the widow Hiermans' place, which unfortunately this does not appear on any of the maps we have from the period. It's not called out as Swart's Tavern. But again, by the buildings that we are there, we can tell that this is in the vicinity of modern Upper Red Hook. And by 1800, he has turned over the business to a relative of his, Cornelius Swart Jr. So in both cases, we have maps that say Red Hook is now where Upper Red Hook is today, and we have documentation that says the quote-unquote village of Red Hook, because by 1800, that's what they're calling it, but that's village with a small v. Capitalization matters a lot in these cases. So that's in Upper Red Hook. However, it doesn't take too long for things to begin changing again, also because of the stage line. Because the stagecoach company is beginning to see that, mail is great, mail is steady, there's always going to be income from our contract with the state of New York. But you know what's expanding? Passengers. Because people want to go places, they have business to conduct. They may not be going all the way from Albany to New York City. But who here would love to walk from the village of Red Hook to the village of Rhinebeck today? Especially today, 94 degrees, hard pass, no thank you. So these are being used for local transportation, so much so that in 1795, specifically November of 1795, an announcement comes out in all of the papers, including the Poughkeepsie Journal, saying, we the stage company are happy to announce that we are creating 3 new services and an additional line, a line that is specifically, in terms of a road it is going up, is specifically designed for the convenience of passengers. So they are multiplying the number of services they have per week. They have 2 routes now, because if you don't want to go through Hudson, you can go through Claverack, because rivalries also go way, way back in time around here. And that means you have to have more taverns. And not only taverns, but you begin to see hotels, because some people want to stay in a little bit more grandeur than on the 2nd floor, literally sleeping on the floor of a tavern. Now, I'm sure it is by simple coincidence that a very important landowner, this would be General John Armstrong Jr., just happens to have his land holdings that are now more or less the 4 corners of the village of Red Hook surveyed in March of 1795. And I'm sure that he didn't attach too much importance to this, because he only did the very unusual step of making sure that this map was filed with the county clerk, which was not the easiest thing to do, but it was the most secure thing to do. It's why if you own property today, your title company requires you to file with the county clerk's office, because if your house burns down, it's not going to be lost. If the dog eats all of your paperwork, you've got a copy there. So we have a copy of this map at the county clerk's office, also in full color. That's how you know it's fancy. And when we zoom in, you can see, and I'm going to try to stand where I am least blocking the views here, you see most of the lots, now they've been subsequently subdivided, that are along the east side of Broadway today. This is March 1795. In March of 1795, basically the only thing that is in what we today consider the village of Red Hook is the Elmendorf Inn. There are probably 1 or 2 other houses there, but this is not a big deal before 1795. It's okay, this is one of those places that the stage might stop to refresh itself, but they aren't going to be there very long. March of 1795, we have all of the surveying work done that is necessary to either sell or rent lots. And this map here is so important that it is updated through the 1840s before the final version is filed with the county. That's how we know, for example, the Bonastiels have the corner that is still in some circles known for them today. In that Masseneau building, the Masseneau family, their ownership of that lot is noted here, probably late 1790s, first decade of the 19th century. So what I'm suggesting here is basically that John Armstrong Jr., because all these guys play tennis at the same clubs, you know how it goes, was having a few cocktails with the principals of the of the Stagecoach Corporation, and they happened to say, well, we're going to be introducing a vast expansion in service. There's going to be an opportunity for more stage stops, more businesses to support people. One of those places is going to be in an area where two major roads come together. The road that goes out to Pine Plains one way and down to what's now Berrytown the other way. And of course, the post road itself. You own this land, you might want to subdivide it and then sell it because there's going to be a demand for people setting up shops and houses. I don't have any firm, hard evidence of that, but I'm pretty convinced by it. So, Red Hook begins to move again, but it is moving in that direction very slowly, as we will see. Now, for those of you who are keeping up, we've had a Red Hook that was on the Hudson River. Then we had a Red Hook that moved more or less 5 miles directly east inland to be on the post road. Now we have someone who is building a purpose-designed, mixed residential and commercial use development. You thought that was a new thing? No. Duchess has always been leading the way on that stuff. Well, what happened to the original old Red Hook that we saw in 1770? It becomes known as either Red Hook Landing or as Canteen's Landing, because a guy named David Canteen builds a big dock there, which serves all of the river traffic. Those Hoffmans who are being ground up in mills for Hoffmans, actually Hoffman's Mills, are setting up a big mill complex there. It's a happening place, but it's no longer really the center of things. It has begun to develop a separate identity. So it's known as Canteen's Landing sometimes. Sometimes it's known as Red Hook Landing. But, hold your beers. If you thought that General John Armstrong Jr. was like ahead of his time and maybe a little bit out of his mind, let me introduce you to Peter, or if you prefer, Pierre de la Biguerre. He is quite possibly a bona fide international man of mystery. He shows up here after the Revolution. He is French, which, at that point in time is entree into all of the great estates. He cozies up with the Livingstons. He gets title to land in what is now Tivoli. He gets title to land over in what is now Greene County. And he also has potentially the earliest example, at least in the Northeast, of a bottled natural water scheme. He's no joke. Historic Red Hook has one of these letters writing to people and saying, well, the best thing to be drinking, not that stuff that comes out of the well. No, you want to buy my brand of bottled water. It comes from only the best springs. But he doesn't confine himself to this. He also decides that real estate speculation, that's where the real money is, which unfortunately is only true if you actually have money to begin with, and there's no sign that he actually did. But he does come up with a plan for a community. This community he names Tivoli, which is probably potentially named after Emperor Hadrian's pleasure gardens back in Imperial Rome. It's a name that really sells the concept. He has a nice plan drawn up of all the squares and buildings laid out around regular streets. There's going to be gardens. The Hudson River's right there. This is dated 1795. This is one of his signatures that we have. It's relatively rare, from 1797. So this is fantastic. I know that we have two people here from Tivoli. Has anyone been to Tivoli? All right. What happens once you get past the Four Corners and keep going to the river? Does that land look level? Are there beautiful European-style blocks filled with buildings on that land, even today? No, this is kind of a big bust because his dream sketch here has no relation to reality in a proud tradition of real estate developers. So, it all makes sense, but that's where Tivoli starts to come into the equation. Though it takes everyone a little bit of time to really come around to that. You still see a lot of Red Hook Landing, Canteen's Landing. He's a very compelling figure, but I'm afraid that at this point in time I can only handle one compelling figure from Tivoli at a time. And of course, that's going to continue to be General John Watts Device. You'll hear more from him if you have not already had enough already. He is going to make another appearance here. So it's 1795. you have the village of Tivoli, lowercase v, has been proposed by Peter de la Béguerre. The future position of the village of Red Hook has actually been surveyed and for reals laid out by General John Armstrong Jr. What is the next step? It's taxation. Because in 1797, the New York State Assembly decides, well, you know what? I think there are ways in which we could get more money from people if we only knew which town they lived in, which required all of the towns of New York to have survey maps drawn up. Now, some of these surveys are like, me just putting lines on a piece of paper and saying, Some of them are very well professionally drawn. The survey map of Rhinebeck, which remember, at this time, it's not 1812 yet, it was 1797, Red Hook is part of Rhinebeck. So it's included, and it's a Rhinebeck map because it's super fancy and ritzy. I mean, look at that. That blob must look beautiful from the back of the room. You also know that it's a Rhinebeck project because there's not just one surviving copy, there's 4. And none of them are the same. The only thing they agree on are the actual borders of Rhinebeck. Because each of these maps has different people's houses on them, or in some cases, no houses at all on them. But this is vital for getting the taste, a feeling, and insight into, all right, where are we in this development of heading towards the modern era? So let's begin to take a look. First, we have Upper Red Hook, which is not at all because I happen to live in Upper Red Hook and show it favoritism every opportunity I can. The map version that's held by Bard College is the most detailed. It has the most number of houses. It has the most number of houses with actual names attached to it. And that's how we begin to get an idea of, okay, Swartz Tavern is sadly nowhere on this, but other people's places like Van Ness's house are, and we can then begin to figure out, all right, relative position. But you can see there's a church up here. You've got Dr. Wheeler's house. It's always good to have a physician nearby. You've got a couple of places to stay. This is clearly a happening spot, even though it is not labeled as a community. You just kind of infer this. And one of the things about the language of towns, villages, and cities is this question of when does a community become a municipality? Thankfully, we have state law to answer that question, as we'll see. And then this is another version of that same map of Upper Red Hook. This is sort of the economy version. This is the one turned into the state of New York. So if you look, there's like 3 buildings called out on this. There's still a ton of buildings on here, but only a couple are named. Then we move down to what becomes in the 1820s Lower Red Hook, what at that point in time is just crossroads. We have the Elmendorf Inn called out. We have the grist mill. We have General Van Ness's house, which is one of the pieces of local, I don't think it's technically lore. I can't find documentation for it, but one of the arguments about when does Lower Red Hook become the village is when Van Ness moves from Upper Red Hook down to Lower Red Hook. And his house is still there today. Some people call it Maysland, some people call it Mays Field. Historians have battled for decades over that, so, take whichever version you like. Then we look at the Rhinebeck Historical Society's version, which is very basic. You have Elmendorf's called out, you have Van Ness's, you have the grist mill, you have like 25% of the houses that appear on the Bard map, and it's like, did they just like drawing houses? Were there really that number of houses? We don't know, but it still seems like a pretty serious community going on, and that's the New York State Archives version. So now we get to the really spicy part, the Tivoli section. And this is all, again, from the same huge map. It's very long. So Tivoli is the only place that is actually called out by name. Tivoli is written there in nice big letters. You also have Canteens Landing down here. For those of you, especially in the back, who might be able to see this, again, Tivoli. You have all of these houses that were definitely not there because no one has built on that land in 200 years. But nevertheless, we're back to kind of like where we were in the 1770s, where the only place really called out by name within what becomes the town of Red Hook, what is at that point the town of Rhinebeck, is Tivoli. And it's called out as Tivoli. We even see it on the New York State Archives version, which is the most economical, like least detail possible version. It is still there with Tivoli and Canteens Landing. All right, so now we're going to move forward at a bit of an accelerated pace because we're getting out of the era that I nerd about the most and down to business. So, 1812 or 1813, who's really to say, is when the New York State Assembly incorporates the town of Red Hook. So the town of Red Hook becomes a really real town. Now, that question that I asked earlier, when does a community become a municipality? In New York, the answer to that before 1870 is when you convince the Assembly to pass a law laying out your town. Either they're going to take territory from an existing town, which is what happens in places like Dutchess County, or they're going to create completely new counties and new towns, which happens a lot out in western New York. Now in this case, they're dividing the town of Rhinebeck roughly in half, saying that the northern portion is going to be the town of Red Hook, and then they are extremely unhelpful by saying, yes, it's June 2nd, 1812, we are passing this law today. But you know it's Rhinebeck. We're going to give them 10 months to figure out how they're going to split up the money for poor relief, where the new town meeting place is going to be, get all of the local elections figured out, because Red Hook now has to elect its own civil officers. Hence the argument that maybe Red Hook should rebrand as 1813 instead of 1812. I'm going to leave that up to the elected officials. But one of the good things to come out of this is a new map. It is nowhere near as detailed as the Rhinebeck map, which is how you can figure out that Red Hook is no longer part of Rhinebeck. We just have the economy version. Is anyone here from Rhinebeck? Oh, well then, well, of course you're from Rhinebeck, Mark, but troublemakers. So don't worry, I know this is a blog for a lot of you, but we do have some close-ups. So here's what we've got for Upper Red Hook. Two things, the church and the inn. They're pretty important, I guess, but come on, there's so much more to Upper Red Hook then and now. Then we have what is turning into the village of Red Hook, the modern village, which now has 3 inns, as well as a High Dutch Reformed church. Still the grist mill. They don't even have General Van Ness's house called out here. Do they even know the Van Nesses? Very important family. But that tells you that yes, the stagecoach is going to be spending a lot of time down here. This is one of our indications of expansion. And then of course you've got to have Tivoli. Here it is. It's still jamming. They're calling it Canteens Landing, even though David Canteen has now been dead for some time, like 15 years. But you know, it's state work. It takes a long time. Details. So we're seeing again, Tivoli. It's pretty set. It's there. It's happening. Upper Red Hook, you know, they call it a village. It isn't technically a village because to be incorporated as a village, just like to be incorporated as a town or as a city, you've got to get a separate act of the state assembly to write you through, and that is a lot of political patronage. But we're seeing these centers develop, and then we fast forward to 1829. So this is the David Burr, no relation to the guy who offed Alexander Hamilton. Just want to get this out there right now. He produces these maps into the 1830s. I love them because they show why the roads don't go where we want to go today. They went to the places where people from the 1750s to the 1830s wanted to go. This is especially true in Stanford, because if you've ever wondered why so many roads go to Bangor, that's because Bangor used to be a thriving metropolis. You've got to turn that clock way back. But here in the Upper Red Hook portion, we have now Lower Red Hook is called out. So it is an official, standing, organized community. Not yet a municipality, but something important enough to appear on a map. Upper Red Hook has now gone from just being Red Hook to Upper Red Hook. You know, it's the more genteel and stately cousin to Lower Red Hook. A place for quiet contemplation off of the beaten path. Tivoli has lost its name. It is now the Upper Landing. Oof. It's not going to be good in the tourism literature. Everyone's going to be confused. But wait, down here at the bottom, we've got this new community that's sprung up. It's called the Lower Landing. I sense an ominous presence, a disturbance in the forest, like a municipal phenomenon is about to be unleashed upon us. And so in 1850, it is. In 1850, the Gillette Company of Philadelphia does a really awesome map of Dutchess County. They put the names of so many houses on it. Those are probably the houses where the surveyors hung out while they were doing their survey. But it gives us a lot of detail on how things have grown and changed. So I know, again, this is kind of a blob from the back. We're going to make it a slightly better blob, maybe not too high rendition, but the folks up front, you ought to get a chance to see this. So first of all, Upper Red Hook, yes, we are still here. Look at how many houses and names and everything else, all of which have been confirmed through title searches. So we know that the 1850 map is legit. Secondly, Lower Red Hook has lost the lower. It is now just Red Hook. So 1770, we start with the village of Red Hook being on the Hudson Valley shoreline. Now it's where it is today, in the center of the town. Then we get Rock City. I thought that was in Chattanooga, Tennessee. They have a lot of trolls and caves there. Visit Rock City. I mean, if you've been through Rock City today, you've actually seen that someone has put out the Visit Rock City, Tennessee signage. I'm sure Dutchess Tourism loves that. So in 1850, Rock City is called out because even though it is a community of the town of Milan, if there are any Milanese here with us tonight, don't worry, I'm not stealing your glory. This is Milan. Some of the homeowners didn't realize that they should cross the town line, that makes things complicated. So it is a hamlet today that sits in two places. But at that point in time, it is a village, lowercase v. Then, what is this? Berrytown? Who? What? Why? Those are all great questions to answer through our merchandise table. We have some great publications here. Otherwise, I can give you the town and village historian's personal cell number. I keep it on speed dial. She loves questions, especially like 1 or 2 a.m. It's the best time to reach her. So Berrytown is now popped up. Tivoli's back. Except it's located in a place where no one lives because the slope is like that. Very poor, or maybe very good drainage, too good drainage. But then we've got this thing up here called Myersville. What we are seeing here, for those of you who also felt that disturbance in the fours, is the growth of hamlets. So there's not technically a real hard and fast government definition in terms of towns, villages, and cities for hamlets. Hamlets are basically places where a bunch of people live, where a post office has been set up at some time in the past. It's not self-governing, it's not self-taxing. It's just kind of there, they get their name on the map, everyone's confused, they build hotels, people come and visit, It's a big part of the third generation tourism infrastructure, because we're on generation 17 now of tourism. But this stuff starts to pop up and it starts to complicate things, and the state of New York does not like complication. So it's 1867 now, and wait, we have an addition to the secret language of town, villages, and cities. All of these colored blotches here, those aren't municipal boundaries. Those are school districts. Yeah. That's a separate taxing district. I've been told by reliable sources that in modern New York, we have 37 different types of self-taxing districts. Just something to bear in mind there. So when we zoom in, Upper Red Hook's there, it's got its own district, and the schoolhouse, which is huge, is still there today. Red Hook, the modern village, is still there. As you can see, it's called out as having a post office, all these places, P.O. Rock City's gone, by the way. They've decided in 1867 we are not putting that on the Red Hook map. That is going to be just on the Milan map. Berrytown has expanded a bit. They've got their post office. Not sure what happened to the hotel. Oh no, and we have even more additions. We have Cedar Hill, and we have Annandale, which you would know today as Bard College, basically. And up top, we have Tivoli and Madeline. What happened to Myersville? It was there and it was gone, which is why this is the secret language of towns, villages, and cities, not hamlets, not aspiring towns, villages, and cities. That's going to be a separate program series. All right, so what happens? Clearly by the 1850s and 60s, we just have this explosion in local communities that have enough wherewithal, enough people living there, enough economic activity going on to claim some level of official status. Like they're a place on a map. They have a post office. These are serious things. It's nothing to really sniff at. But if they want to take it to the next level, if, for example, they want to, and we laugh at this, but it's a serious thing today, if they want to build a municipal water and sewer, you can't do that as a hamlet because you've got to go to the town and be like, hey, can you get some tax money so that we can put sewers in the village, small case B, of Red Hook? And the town's going to be like, no, because everyone who's in charge of town government lives way outside of that village. We're not going to pay for that. And of course, the state assembly can't really handle hundreds of applications at a time for incorporation as villages. That's going to be, they've got more important things to do, especially after the Civil War. It's the Gilded Age, there's money to be made, there's railroads, no time for that. So in 1870, the state assembly decides we're going to deal with this with one law. In 1870, they pass a law that permits villages and cities to organize themselves as long as they go through this specific set of procedures. So remember, that's 1870 that law is passed. And in 1872, Tivoli is there. They are on top of things. So in May of 1872, they begin this process, which is you need to get a group of local notables, people who have standing in the community, to come together and say, all right, we have been empowered by the state of New York to start a process of basically self-determination of peoples creating our own village. So after those guys, and they are guys, it is 1872, get together, they print up all of these announcements that they're going to have a village election. That is basically an election to determine whether or not enough of the people living in this village with a lowercase v want to become a village with an uppercase v, self-governing, self-taxing. And we have the list of those names because they need to put them out there. We've got folks like John D. Rockefeller, and of course you can't assume that's the oil magnate around here because Rockefeller Road is not named after the same guy who built libraries at Brown University. Sorry, it's a big family. You've got Lashers, you've got Coles, you've got Witherwaxes, all the fellers, pretty much everyone in the Tivoli area is on board with this. So they have their election, they announce it, everyone needs to come to, I think it's actually the hotel in Madeline, on the specific day and vote. So, as you can see up there, 170 votes are cast. This is not like a high barrier that you have to get over. You don't need like 500 signatures like you need today to run for office. Of those 170 votes, 117 are in favor, which if you can do math, I'm a historian because math is hard, but happily the town clerk wrote out that leaves, really should be 53, but somehow it's 52 against, but it passes. So now, congratulations, you have authorization to hold elections, to create a budget, you have set municipal boundaries. There is now a village of Tivoli by June of 1872 because the date of actual incorporation is when you finally file it with the county clerk. So County clerk sets birthdays after 1870. Tivoli immediately gets going on a bunch of municipal infrastructure, including water, which is a big thing there. Eleanor Roosevelt eventually gets involved to finish that project. But that's our first real village in the town of Red Hook, with a capital V as a self-governing, self-taxing municipality. And that's why it matters today if you live in the village of Tivoli with a capital V, or in the village of Tivoli with a lowercase v, which is kind of like how the USPS sees the world. We'll get to that at the end. Now, 22 years later, the lowercase v village of Red Hook, yes, I see, they eventually get with the program. They're like, wait, the town offices meet here, but the village is in Tivoli. We should probably do something about that. So they go through the same process. They get an awesome but much smaller poster put together here. It lays out the boundaries of what the village is going to be. It promises that their annual budget will only be $1,200. Ooh, I mean, it's not the worst amount of money in that period of time, but it goes up fast. They hold their elections in what becomes the village. And once again, we have the vote count. There are 195 cast, 138 in favor, and then 56 against. So now you have an official village of Red Hook. Why does this make a difference that you have villages with capital V's? It means that you can get municipal water and sewage, which is a big issue. Just ask any of the municipalities in Dutchess County that are not villages, but that have like septic tanks next to wells. We've known for a while that's not a great formula for personal and community health. It also means that you don't have to go to the town every time you want to repair a road or build a park or anything else. It increases the attraction of living in there. On the other hand, if you live in a village, that means you get hit with double the taxes. If you've ever wondered why that bill looks the way it does, because you pay town taxes and village taxes. And that's why I live in Upper Red Hook, which is still a hamlet. Now, as for where we are today, so if you look at the postal address for Lasting Joy Brewery, it says Tivoli, New York, which is in Dutchess County, as we have established. However, when you look at the actual boundary line of Dutchess County, it is just ever so slightly south of where we are sitting right now. If you keep going west on Lasher Road, you'll be back in Dutchess County in a jiff. I mean, I feel comfortable doing programs here because historically this was Dutchess County. You know, it's all good. As long as we are south of the Rojo, I'm good. But why would a place that is technically in the town of Claremont have a Tivoli mailing address? Which sometimes really gets people worked up because they're like, I live in the town, or they say I live in the town of Tivoli, and that gets me worked up. But they'll say, I live in the village of Tivoli, look at my postal address. I'll be like, no, you do not live in the village of Tivoli, you live in the ancient hamlet of Curly's Corners. It just happens to have the same zip code. What was that zip code? Because this is how the United States Postal Service sees the world. So according to them, Red Hook, which is zip code 12571, includes basically all of the town of Milan, ironically a good chunk of Rhinebeck. I mean, that's got to be upsetting some people in the past. And then shoots dangerously close to Columbia County. But up here, Tivoli has thrown its postal borders even further out. Because again, we are more or less, if you can see the red pointer, right where it is here. So it's even more of Claremont belongs to Tivoli if you're going by the United States Postal Service standards. And that's why you pay taxes to one place. You receive your mail in a different place. And sometimes you pay taxes to two places because you can live in both simultaneously. I can't get you with that math. But thank you all very much for bearing with this rambling presentation. Appreciate you coming out. I hope you have enjoyed the air conditioning as much as I have. I am a native of the South. I moved north because I thought that summers here would have a high of 75. Yeah, false advertising. If anyone has any questions, I'm happy to field them. Oh, of course, we've got a couple of questions. But if you want to go get food, if you want to drink, oh yes, and all those maps, if you want to remember everything you've heard tonight, we have t-shirts. So that if someone comes up to you and says, hi, tourism should love this. Hi, I'm a visitor from out of town. I'm looking for Annandale. Where is it? You can say, well, if you look right here, we're here. Annandale's here. Just find any road that goes that way. People really wanted to get there in the 1790s. Had a lot of them. All right, so, Skip. Oh, I knew it. I'm savoring the immense pain in my soul with this question. It's kind of like talking about the town or even the kingdom of Tivoli. So the question is, where does hardscrabble come in? There is a beloved local story that what is today the village of Red Hook was once known as hardscrabble because it was so difficult to live down there. Because Henry Beekman and John Armstrong Jr. didn't want to give out rents for very free. Now, the whole idea is that, the soil was so terrible down there, it was a hardscrabble living, except when you look at it, the soil is wonderful throughout Red Hook. So, Elizabeth and I have looked into this. The earliest documentable piece of data talking about hardscrabble in Red Hook is like the 1938 28 yearbook for Red Hook High School. So I'm going to have to label that as busted. Chris, did you have a question?
I did. The Elmendorf dates from the mid-1760s, as we see on the sign. And in 1785, at least as I recall, there was an ad that said, that advertised the Elmendorf as an inn on the stagecoach run. So what are we to think now if really Red Hook didn't get going until the late, or the 1790s?
So the question is, the Elmendorf Inn, you should all go visit it, beautiful place. We are like 73.759% comfortable with saying it's 1750. We're like 84.2% comfortable with saying it's 1760. In there is an old farmhouse. And we see ads for it being sold actually twice in the 1780s that talk about this is a great place for a store and for a tavern and all sorts of stuff. So this would be one of those things where the first couple of years of the stagecoach would stop at to replenish, to let people have a break if they had passengers, water the horses, especially on a day like today. It was Red Hook, or at least that part of Red Hook, early on, biggest structure around. Because again, a lot of this land is owned by people who don't even want to subdivide it to rent it out. They're just farming it. That's why it's such a big deal when Van Ness, in March of 1795, was like, I suddenly feel like I should subdivide my land into lots. I don't know why this feeling came over me. So, my argument at least is that Elmendorf is always the linchpin of pretty much the geographical core of Red Hook. And it is more or less where the roads that go east, west, north, south come together, because the current road goes eventually down to Berrytown and then out to Pine Plains, has changed its exact position depending on when in time you're talking about. Nothing stays the same forever. But by the 1790s, you've got this sudden growth, you've got 2 more hotels there, you've got the Van Nesses moving down. That just shows you that while there was always a presence there of some kind, it's that planned commercial development, it's that expansion of transportation really that gets things rolling. Any other questions? All right, you guys must be as ready for a beer as